All right, so I know we're doing this all remote here this year, but wanted to get started on technical debrief with all of the teams and everyone that's been engaged with us for CPTC this year. So I know we have hopefully all of our teams from finals here over the last 3 or 4 days, but in addition to that, we've also invited everyone from the regional perspective. So as we've said many times, this is the point where we're going to be willing to talk about just about anything from the competition. That being said, we have a few slides we put together, as we always do, to talk through some of the funny things we've seen, but also to talk through some of the feedback that we've got just talking with everyone. That being said, there's also certainly a few other things we want to cover with all of you and are looking forward to it. So I'm going to kick us off. This is Lucas Morris, one of the members of the development team, and want to just double check and make sure just kind of talk about a few of the changes that we have done here over the past year. So there's a few things you all may have noticed, especially for finals, which one was much heavier network segmentation. The second was your first network, you had a much heavier presence of Windows on the environment than we've had since really about year 3. We also have actually the weakest passwords and Active Directory controls that we have ever had during any of the competition. And our PLC infrastructure was far more sensitive. And we're going to be talking about all of this. But these are some things that I think, as competitors, you probably saw, especially for those in finals coming in. And in fact, in many cases, we made things less secure. And as I see it, clients regularly, we relied on our network controls to make sure that we were secure instead of looking at defense in depth. So with that, there's one other thing I really wanted to talk about, and it's something that frankly not all of you would have seen, but our volunteers did. And we had a lot of people put a lot of time into this throughout the year, and that is changes in tooling. We spent an immense amount of time and effort on this year. And frankly, from infrastructure build to scoring and team management, right? And he'll probably joke about this later, but Tom Kopchek has often said that CPTC is the collegiate spreadsheet competition for him. And we're trying to automate a lot of these things. So hopefully you saw that. We had bots doing content, especially in chat, but in other places as well throughout the day. We had systems that we put together, and I've got some screenshots of them here on our end, to help us manage the system, to help us manage the competitions, to help our scorers and our volunteers. Instead of having to do Google Forms, there were information around scoring and getting in to score directly. Right, so there was a lot of really interesting stuff in here. For those of you that have ever used LaForge, which is a public project that Alex Levinson wrote and started a few years ago, we've had a team of both volunteers and students throughout the past year working on essentially refactoring that from the ground up. And you can see in the top right here, we now have a management site that we can go into, and we can look at the status of all of the teams and all of the systems, and we can actually drill down into this and see what's happening. And I have an example here of actually our end of the chatbot where we could see every message being sent. And at regionals, we interacted with all of you throughout. And so there was a lot of time and effort put into that this year. And I think over the next year, we're really looking at this as a 2-year project. And that is truly the scope that CPTC has gotten to, in that we are now looking to use that to send and receive information with you. And I think ultimately this is going to enable us to do a lot of really cool stuff in the environment once we get all of this finished. And so with that, the last major thing is, getting all of this into the RIT cyber range and the new institute, right? Those servers were just installed between regionals and finals. So the fact that we were able to run a portion of the environment in that is really, again, a testament to all of the volunteer time and effort that we've had. Now, typically, I'll come here with some statistics on number of hours, how much stuff we did, all of that. We're not going to do that this year for a few reasons. One, because we actually changed the way our spend is working in Amazon. We've changed the way that various things fit together. But the one thing I do want you all to understand is on the volunteer side, this is easily 10,000 hours of development effort. We had more volunteers than we've ever had in the past. We had 30 plus people working on this at various levels throughout the year, and it is just a massive amount of effort. And none of us get paid to do any of this. So it's been said once, I'll say it again. If you see a CPTC volunteer somewhere, give them a hug when we can do that again. Thank them, because there's a lot of time that goes into this. So with that, we're going to spend a little bit of time moving between the various teams to kind of talk about some of the things that we're doing. And for now, I'm going to pass it over to Tom to talk about business and monitoring.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's get a confirmation. You can hear me okay? Excellent. Okay. So, Lucas, I'm going to have you drive the slides on this, and then I will just talk about things. So, first and foremost, my role at CPTC is kind of twofold. I focus on the business and monitoring team here, and basically the parts of the competition where we try to make this event as real as possible for you and as close to what you might experience during an actual engagement is what I really try to do. And then we also have to focus on competition integrity and supporting many of the research initiatives that come out of CPTC. In addition to making this competition something that is fun for all of you and provides a realistic experience close to what you'd see in the workforce, it's really, really important for us to be able to use the data that comes out of this event, not only for making the event better and realistic, but for driving our research teams that use this data in order to enhance the overall cybersecurity community as a whole. And this year, I think we did a really good job across the board of doing a lot of that. And it's just been a continuous improvement of a project that we've been starting probably for years now to actually get to the point where we can leverage this technology as we did. So with that, I'd like to dive into some of the behind the scenes components that we have and the parts of this event that you may or may not have directly seen, but are really useful in how this event actually happens. So, Lucas, can you go to the next slide, please? Excellent. So, first and foremost, we have big data. We have a lot of sources of data. In fact, as you can see in that screenshot there, the amount of data that we collected just on Saturday was over 3 terabytes. And we've been consistently throughout all these events collecting 1.5 to 3 terabytes of data every weekend that we run this event. That includes regionals and these finals. So every day, 1.5 to 3 terabytes of data. It's a massive amount to deal with. And as we'll see in some of the next slides, we'll talk a little bit about the environment that we have and how we collect all of that. And also, with the move to the cyber range, we have even more monitoring and observability into how everything is happening. So one of the screenshots here is showing the flows that we can see within the VMware NSX console and see where teams are connecting to, where connections are going. We also recently implemented the ability to basically see everything that was going on every system's screen as it was happening. So all of your VDI environments, we were able to watch what was happening. And I kind of imagine that's how the NSA operates, even though that's probably not actually what they have for, most of us, hopefully. But it was really kind of interesting to not only see the data that's coming in the logs, but to be able to also correlate that with what actually was on your screens and looking at your chats in Discord at the same time. So although we couldn't all be in the same room, having the ability to really have a good sense of everything that was going on was awesome. So, Lucas, next slide, please. So the way that we collect all this data is using Splunk. That's what I do all the time in my professional job every day, and I leverage that experience here with CPTC. But that all said, I have a great team here of former CPTC competitors to use that data and make the system work well. And as you all know, the best people who know how to find things are the ones that know how to break things. So having a team of CPTC competitors that have seen what we've done in the past and know how the students think really is helpful for us to be able to understand what sort of things we should be looking for. So the first thing that actually ever went in the RIT cyber range was the Splunk environment for CPTC. And I asked for a lot of CPU and storage, and they delivered. So we have over 20 terabytes of really, really fast SSD storage in an environment that's very close to this diagram that I put together about 5 minutes ago. Every host in the environment runs a Splunk universal forwarder, and we have the collection of data turned up to about the maximum. It far exceeds anything that I would ever implement at a client for most data sources, but it gives us a lot more visibility into everything that's going on. But, and the side effect, that does result in a massive amount of data. One of the also interesting things this year was the use of the ICS systems, which, as Jason and Wasabi will talk about later, there's a lot of different components to that that are custom built for this event. Because they're custom built, we were able to custom build a lot of logging for that. And we use Splunk HTTP Event Collector to send events over to that. And Lucas, I think the slides are blank too, so if you could check on that real quick. Perfect. So, as we have these different components working together, we're collecting data from these systems. We're able to identify all kinds of things, from what commands are being issued to if systems are getting locked out to how you're scanning the systems. And basically, we take this data and we use it real time in the environment for alerting. And how do we do that? Well, next slide, Lucas. It is using Splunk's enterprise security product. So, the company I work for, Hurricane Labs, we do a lot of security alerting for customers. For the sake of this event, CPTC is a client. We've adapted a lot of our alerting tools to function based on how we use CPTC products and CPTC tooling, and focus on what sorts of things could be interesting for us to know as competition organizers. It's very much like we are running this as a customer environment, and you are all attackers in this environment that we're looking to identify. And the way that this worked out this year with the remote setup and everything, it worked really, really well. So when we interacted with you and talked about something that was happening in the environment, that wasn't based on us assuming you were doing something. It was based on data. When we called you about the dam being crashed due to traffic that you were sending, that was based on traffic that we sent, or we saw you send. It was also all of the lake levels were coming off of the PLCs in real time, and we knew exactly what was happening within a couple seconds as to what you were doing. So when some of us, as Stuart will talk about later, when he walks into a room and says, hey, we saw you lock out accounts because you ran a scan against our network, and you say, no, we didn't run a scan. We not only have a screenshot of you running that scan, we also have the bash output of what scan you ran, and are seeing all the network traffic for what was going on. So we have pretty good visibility into what's happening. Lucas, if you could also go to the next slide, please. We'll just break down a couple of some of the things that you would see. So like ICS traffic, that was something we were interested in because that was considered sensitive for this client. So you had the opportunity to see that. We were also looking at other things that you were doing throughout the environment and things that could be anomalous. And we also had other searches that we were running identifying behavior. Next slide. This slide is going to cover the dashboard that we used for monitoring the dams. Right now, this was taken before, and I would say actually this last event, because of the segmentation and what you did during the event, we didn't see a lot of dams being crashed, which is great. During the regionals, this event or this dashboard looked very, very different. But the lake levels are all reflected in this top graph, and we are able to see if a lake is going down, if a lake is going up, and how that's behaving. Obviously, it's a lot quicker than it would be in real life, but we would need to do that in order to simulate how this would behave. But this is very much a great dashboard of everything that's happening and how it's behaving. The section where you see the red and green, we can see if there are alarms that are being triggered by the PLCs in the environment. And we can also see if it's raining in the environment. And as you know, when rain is happening, the dam has to react in order to make sure that the lake level stays consistent. I think one of the most awesome parts of this dashboard was when we were testing an environment before one of the regionals, there was a lake level that was acting weird, and it was at the wrong level. And all we did is restarted the software, and we saw the lake level nicely go back to the proper range as it was designed. And seeing that software work exactly the way it was written by the team that developed it, and seeing it reflected in our monitoring tools was really cool. And then also we can see event counts at the bottom there. And we expect those to be very consistent as to how the communication occurs. And if that event count goes down, it indicates that something was impacted with the system. So we had a ton of visibility there just around the monitoring. And this is not unlike something that you might see in a real industrial control system. The only difference is we're looking at each of the team environments separately. And next slide, Lucas. This slide's going to give you a little bit of insight into how we were watching what you were doing on the Linux systems. We had Tim from our monitoring team build this awesome dashboard of our bash command history, and we're able to see all of the commands coming in real time from each of the systems. And this gave us great visibility into what was happening and allowed us to, among other things, be the next best thing to being in the room with you. And potentially, this level of visibility was a little bit better than we might even see in the room. And then finally, the last slide. I want to say that I am really impressed with what we've been seeing over the past year. Since 2017, 18, and especially 2019, we've been making a push to drive education and keep you all getting better and better. And we're doing that by being as transparent as we can, and also by providing as much educational resources and tools that we can as possible. A couple of the big ones that we've done this year: releasing the reports from last year. This was something that we've wanted to do, and with making reports generic has become possible. I can't tell you how awesome it was to see quite a few of you looking at those yesterday during the event. And as you use that resources, we saw not only for regionals, but for nationals, the reports across the board were consistently quite a bit better. And we're going to keep doing that and providing that information to everyone. Also, last year, we had meetings with each team that competed at the international finals to go over what you did well, what you could improve upon, and overall just have some one-to-one questions and answers with the organizers. We're going to do that again, and we'll make sure that you have signed up for those time slots over the next 2 weeks if you haven't already. And finally, the data that we're producing for this event. This is something that's available not only to competitors, but to everyone in the security industry. The data that I'm showing you in Splunk is data that you'll be able to bring into your own Splunk instance and use to better understand not only what's going on in the environment, but also to help security research. So if you want to see what a Windows domain looks like when it's being scanned by a bunch of people in a pen test environment, you have data from that. If you want to see bash history listing out what attackers are doing, you have that. If you want to see all the DNS requests that occur throughout the competition, we have that. It's a lot of data, but it's available for you to work with. So that kind of wraps up my section, and I'd like to turn it over to Stuart for the World team.
Hey, my name is Stuart, and I'm here representing the World team at CPTC. The World team's job is to build the online presence of the business, to simulate the different employees of the business, and to work on the open source intelligence hints that we leave lying around prior to and during the competitions. You may have known me during the national competition as Gaylord. There are some other Gaylords during the regionals, and I worked alongside Dan and Rachel on the ticketing system from the beginning of the competition. So we did a bunch of cool things this year. So the first thing that we do on the World team is we create a number of employees, the characters that various volunteers will play throughout the competition. Each of these employees has like online web presence, GitHub, Twitter, LinkedIn, all with hints into how the character will behave during the competition. So our sort of crown jewel this year was the chat server. I think basically all of the teams during the regional competitions found their way into the chat server one way or another. We used the chat server to basically just simulate, the standard chatter that any company would have, as well as leaking hints throughout the competition. I think one thing that wasn't readily apparent to many of the teams is that the chat server actually updated in real time. So if you compromise the chat server early on and looked at the chat, you might not have realized that it updated throughout the day. During the regional competitions, it was wide open, but the national competition, it required a bit of effort to get into. And we had a different chat for each of the 2 days of the competition. Next slide, please. So we had a number of other OSINT hints that you could find, including on GitHub. So many of the teams found our GitHub page, which had some configuration scripts on it, as well as organization chart and some other information. Almost all of the teams included this on their initial reports. We followed the remediations and removed these from our GitHub for the national competition. However, we didn't delete the commit history, so a bunch of this information was still available. Next slide. There was also some emails and other information lying around that held old credentials and other bits of useful information. So, when we're creating, this competition is a pen testing competition, but it's also a business competition. And, somebody has to create the business. And so we had a bunch of really great volunteers that spent quite a bit of time to create this environment. And so I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm going to turn it over to the next presenter now.
So I think the next presenter is me talking about applications. So this is Jason. As has already been mentioned, our team spends a ton of time building the custom apps. So I felt like these two slides, or these two pictures, accurately depicted that, because as we go through, basically everything's broken all the time, and then it suddenly magically works just in time for the competition. And there's very little sleep that happens, which at this point I'm sure you all can relate to. But our team, we spend a ton of time building this environment so that you all can have fun and get kind of a sense of the real world. Our goal is to be as immersive as possible. And sometimes that means boring stuff like financial systems that may not be the most exciting things. And this year it means something a little bit more complex and interesting, which was the power grid. So Lucas, next slide. So I don't know if this diagram has been shown already or not, but this is a map of the transformers. So as those that were testing may have noticed, on the .10 subnet, there were a bunch of transformers. That was the power bus, we called it. One of the challenges this year was, how do we emulate a power grid in code? Because a real power company, right, you would have power lines, and transformers could determine voltage and sense the phases of electricity and all these things. And I had no idea coming into this, and I don't know if anybody else on the team had much of a clue about things like three-phase electricity and other kind of technical details around electrical power grid supply and distribution. So we had a huge learning curve this year in how do we do that. And then once we figured out, okay, this is what it is, how do we then emulate that in code? Because we don't have an actual power grid to use, so we have to emulate all that. So the easy part of that was like, okay, we need transformers, so that's what this map depicts. Here's the transformers. You can see we've got the wind farm, we had a dam, we had a nuclear power station. We had several transformers, some of which were distribution transformers, some of which were endpoint transformers. And those endpoint transformers kind of had a strata. So we were powering things like the hospital, and we were also powering residences. And obviously, as a power company, you have differences in how you need to meet your obligations to those customers, right? Like obviously, if you take down a residential transformer, that's terrible, but it's not as terrible as if you take out the hospital's transformer. So that was kind of interesting, just building all of that up. Lucas, next slide. So these diagrams show kind of what we built. So on the left is the power grid itself. And that includes, as I mentioned, the supply transformers. So the dam and the wind farm and the nuclear power station and all of the step-up transformers that were involved in that. And then going out to, there was actually an uplink to an external power supply because we have a surplus as a local residential thing. We happen to have more power being generated by our supply chain than we're using. So we actually pipe out to the national grid was one of the things that we did. And then we also have, like I mentioned, our hospital and then our residential transformers and so on. And on the right, this is actually a screenshot from one of the reports that I really liked, and I believe it's sufficiently redacted. But I haven't yet built my own diagram of what the network looked like, and this looked accurate, and I really liked the neatness of it. So if you consider the complexity of the network that we built, that's a really nice snapshot, and then multiply that times roughly 70 teams for regionals and then 15 teams for finals. And that's what we built and ran. So hat tip to Infra, and Lucas will talk more about what all was involved in getting all of that up. But everything in the green down there is what the custom apps were. And then a little bit over on the right side of that as well, with the HMI stuff that Wasabi is going to talk about in just a second. Next slide, Lucas. So what's a Modbus? I was super happy. I was a little sad at regionals because not many people played with the transformers. A lot of people played with the dams, and Forrest did a fantastic job with the dam, and that was a lot of fun. There was a lot of cool code that went into that, and Wasabi's going to talk about that a little bit as well. The transformers and the power bus was kind of my baby, minus the HMI and the microgrid. So I was a little sad that not many people played with that, but a ton of you did for finals, and I was really happy about that because for me that was the hardest part. I had no idea what Modbus is. I had no idea how power grids worked. So I spent a lot of time, almost probably a month and a half, just trying to get over the hurdle of how do I even do this. So yay, thank you. This slide is really just a thank you for playing with Modbus because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how the hell I even Modbus. Next slide. I think this is Wasabi. Yeah, it looks like it's on.
Okay. So thank you for playing power control systems. There was a lot of stuff that went into today, and the interesting thing about all the SCADA systems was that it wasn't one system. Apps team usually designs a lot of independent components. However, this year everything had to be integrated, because it's HMI, it's industrial control systems. Not one system does any specific task, but together they do a lot of things. So there were some interesting things we saw this year. First, the dam system. I don't want to talk too much about that. I want to give some time for Forrest to be able to talk about that. But the dam system was completely custom. It was not based off of any previous protocol. It was completely custom written. It was odd byte endings. So if you just throw it into something, you try to analyze it, it's going to look really funky. The reason we did that is because there's more than just Modbus. And a lot of teams suggested, okay, just get rid of Modbus. Well, this is a protocol that didn't have Modbus, but the problem is, just because you can't read it doesn't mean it's not secure, or it is secure. And in this case, it was a very insecure protocol. That was, of course, piped to another system, that went to another system, that eventually led to the HMI interface that everyone knew and loved. I wish we had a screenshot of it. That entire HMI interface was dynamically generated based on the data that the world simulator was generating. that data was controlled by a JSON web server, and to my knowledge, only one team took the time to go through all the data and pull the app back. So while these are critical systems, as a pen tester, you don't have to only just pull, if the HMI system was out of scope for nationals. But as a pen tester, you don't have to, just because it's out of scope doesn't mean you can just go pen test it, but you can also take a look and do offline analysis. You can figure out what's going on and see if things are secure by pulling packet captures and doing non-invasive things to the network. There was only one team that really did this, and it was very interesting to see. They were able to determine a lot of the vulnerabilities in the HMI application, which included, one, a lot of teams picked up that it was on an unsecured VNC passworded box, but also that the systems had updates every time it did a request. So every time you typed in a value or clicked on anything, it sent the data back to a web server which updated the DAMs. So values could be updated, and you could set water levels too low or too high. You could have things turn off and on. And if you saw those warnings and errors, that meant that something was going wrong, that the HMI that was trying to operate everything and keep the world running was not able to compensate for. In a normal environment, someone would be pressing buttons to fix this. But a lot of teams actually interacted with the app and then caused the dams to crash, or they fuzzed the protocol, which caused it to crash. It was very brittle. So my recommendation to you is look up how to do SCADA. You can't just remove Modbus. When someone puts in $1 million implementation to run a power control system or a dam or things like that, they can't just replace it. Sure, you can go and say, hey, you should do a different protocol, or you should do something more secure. But the reality is that may not be so simple. Some good recommendations that would go out towards that is, isolating those systems, putting in monitoring and things like that, rather than just saying replace the protocol, because that is a solution. But for a company that's put all these systems in that can't easily be removed, it's not always really an option to just replace their systems with something a little bit more modern. So that's it. I want to give Forrest a little bit to speak in a second, but one thing I wanted to say was the protocol and all the other fun stuff that was going on with this. We, as part of the world team type stuff, we had put partial completion of the protocol in a Wireshark dissector on Stack Overflow. There was a poor employee of NG Power that was trying to figure out how to make a Wireshark dissector, and it was published online and to get people to help. And so the final thing, before we go on, is that the most interesting thing is, while teams were struggling to try to understand the HMI and things like that, it was actually breached by a actual threat actor. The firewalls were slightly misconfigured during one of the regionals, and a threat actor had gotten into the OpenVNC and started running some tools to try to exploit the VNC and try to exploit the Modbus. However, because it was a custom protocol, there was no Modbus. So this was kind of interesting to see. So I wanted to throw Forrest in there to just give a quick second on all the stuff he did for the dam. But
alrighty. So for Dam Daniel, you might have had some interaction with it, specifically if you're in mapping the corporate range. We specifically put it on the corporate range due to the fact that we wanted something that would reflect what we had saw in some of the smaller installations that I've actually done audits on, that just slap their SCADA devices straight on the main range. I mean, when this stuff was implemented in the 90s, that's what they did. The protocol itself was a bit banged, fixed width, I should say fixed amount of bytes, with a mix of 4-bit and 6-bit integers with checksums and checksum tables. I would have been surprised if many students would have gotten the protocol itself, but you could have exploited the applications that had been communicating with the protocols to be able to see that. But we made it so that the normal Modbus tools would not work. It's not Modbus, even though it's listening on 502. That was the biggest thing, is that just because it's listening on a port that may indicate a protocol doesn't mean that that's actually the protocol. Ports are arbitrary at best. So always be willing to look at other protocols that are particularly listening on those ports as well. Now, mind you, these PLCs were designed to be very crashy. If you hit 502 with any traffic that it didn't understand, even a single byte, it crashed the PLCs. We made it where it, over time, it would actively get more and more out of sync. So after 10 crashes, it would crash for 3 minutes straight. And if you can imagine, a dam level, the lake level was the most important status of it. The lake level would rise and lower randomly throughout for every minute, and then rain and stuff like that would cause it to be worse. But if you locked up the dam and you couldn't change the gates anymore, caused the dam to overflow or underfill, causing the nuclear power plant to go nice and out without water. So that's why if you ever got a phone call from us or during regionals, was because of that. You would hit the 502 port on the PLC with random data of some sort, even nmap, even just a TCP open with no data will cause it. And it'll cause it to crash. And this is real world due to the fact that some SCADA devices actually have this problem. It's very terrible. The TCP stacks are written in the 80s practically. And there are instances where some SCADA devices, if you even open a port on them, will wipe their firmware because it's an uploading program. So that's why you had to be super careful around SCADA devices, and that's what we kind of wanted to empathize on, is that you got to be careful around the SCADA devices themselves due to the fact that they can be very sensitive to what's going on. So are there any slides for this? Next slide, maybe? Well, I was going to rant then. So, specifically, there was several PLCs. We had lake level, the 2 generator outputs, 2 generator flows, and a drum gate, right? So it was emulating a proper dam with the multiple gates and everything. And we had this really cool graph of everything, of watching all the teams' lake levels, watching all the crashes come in. And we would just sit there waiting for one to go up, just come out of the normal band and just wait for it to go up and up to the moon as the lake overflowed and, caused mass chaos and, destroyed the dam and the town. Because that can happen, amazingly enough. I've actually had a real world incident of doing a wastewater treatment facility. We had a flood because it crashed a PLC controlling a motor. And it locked up the motor, and now we had 20 million gallons per hour of wastewater, didn't have anywhere to go besides up and onto the grass. So that was a really, really bad day, but because I was on site when that happened. But nonetheless, with these, the back end wise, it was Memcache trying to synchronize the real world state. There was a game master that looped through the Memcache, and then all of it was written in PHP because I'm a terrible coder, and all of it was in PHP, which worked amazingly with your terrible data that you kept sending it. But all the PLCs are written in PHP, and we will eventually release a specification, unless you find the dissector, which has the spec in it too. It is terrible. It's a whole new level of terrible. The web PLC protocol. I think that's all I have for the dams. Unless there's questions or something along those lines in the Discord or something. Oh, cool. What you got? I did have an image of the HMI. Hang on. So this was the HMI that Wasabi wrote. It is the most awful program I've ever seen in existence. If you tried to move it away from anywhere, it was always on top. You couldn't minimize it. It redrew the bar graph as it was polling PLCs, which was just terrible. And the only way to indicate that there was actually an error or something along those lines is if the checkmark box was checkmarked, not if the indicator was actually shown. It was very terrible. I have never used an application so god awful in my life. Yeah, that will haunt most people's dreams who actually had to work with it. Yeah, that HMI was glorious. then, so it actually went to a backend controller called Microgrid, which was ran in a Docker container. It was all written. And then the microgrid controller was directly one responsible for communicating with the PLCs. And if the PLCs were locked up, microgrid controller couldn't communicate with the PLCs anymore because they would reject all traffic for several minutes randomly. And then so that's why you had DAM overflows. A lot of teams had DAM overflows. Some of them have multiple DAM overflows during regionals. And we'd have to call them up using terrible siren sounds and ones like that. The teams that had that happen, you know who you are. We recorded those calls, so we have them. We may release them one day, who knows? But we would always call them up as Gaylord and being very angry that their dam is now, signaling the entirety of the world that their stuff is breaking. Right? It was real world consequences for just being willy-nilly on the network. So I think that's all I have specifically. We will.
Yep. Okay, so going to talk and kind of finish us up here a little bit with some of the infra pieces, as everyone has mentioned. So I talked a bit earlier about the tooling and all of the changes we've made there, but there's a few other things that we wanted to make sure everyone knew. The first of which was in the entire environment. So I know there was a lot of struggling here during the finals about how do we pivot, how do we move. And one of the things you may not have realized is every single password during finals was derivative of every password that you saw during regionals. So if you had pulled a local admin hash or run Mimikatz or pulled something out of memory on a workstation, what you might have found is that before the password was password 1. And what you may not have seen is the password for all of our workstations was password 2 with a lowercase p. Except for on the NT box, where the password originally was God. For those that have watched the movie Hackers, you can thank Forrest for that one. And became 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, or God, depending on how you accessed it here during the finals. The AD environment also suddenly had password lockouts, but there were also a bunch of things, and I was really excited this year because one team found it. And this has been open every single year of CPTC. Zone transfers, Kerberoasting, anonymous enumeration, all open on the domain controller. I was very excited someone found zone transfers this year. That made me really happy because I put it in every year as a Windows kind of hacking guy, and no one's seen it yet. So the Windows environment was very open, but it did require some password guessing. And at regionals, you could have sat there and brute force passwords live and never locked anyone out. I think you all noticed that there were no lockouts on any of these systems. But at finals, you would have had to have provided or thought a little bit more about it because we did, and it's actually a setting I see at a lot of clients, wasn't the usual 3 guesses every 60 minutes. Because of the limited time frame, we did actually make it 10 guesses every 60 minutes. And one of the things we do at work is if the client has, let's say the standard, the 3 every 60, we'll make 1 or 2 guesses every 60, 61 minutes. So you could have theoretically gotten during the time of the environment today, let's say we leave a threshold for 2, we would have gotten 8 guesses an hour. You had, about 18 hours in the environment. So that's about 960 guesses, about 1,000 guesses in the environment. And that's where we started to build all of our dictionaries around it. But I will tell you that every single password was derivative of what we did during regionals. And you find that at clients and customers and organizations all the time. So we felt like it was very real world. Now, those ACLs, I think, bugged and frustrated a lot of the team members. But one of the other things that I found very interesting is how focused everyone was on Rocket Chat. So there was a lot of information in it. And as Stuart mentioned, it was one of the crown jewel of the world team this year. And having written some of that bot and done a lot of the imports and been managing that throughout, also some of the stuff they wrote is pretty freaking funny. So hopefully we're going to try and actually just release some of it so everyone can see it, because it was very good work. But one of the other things here is I think everybody got real focused on Rocket Chat, both during regionals and during finals. And when you're doing this professionally, one of the things that you have to really be careful about is not going down a rabbit hole or finding the right rabbit hole to go down. And I think Rocket Chat was a great one to go down, but everyone maybe over-prepared a little bit for it here. And frankly, because what we did is we dumped out of our scoring system the issues from a technical perspective that everyone saw. And we took the top 40 or so and made sure to fix all of those in addition to everything else that we did and we had planned from regionals to finals. So what did that mean? Well, because you all found Rocket Chat during the regionals, Rocket Chat was pretty freaking secure during finals here. And in fact, it was running the latest edition. We actually made a point to update it just Wednesday because they just released a new version just days ago. And so there was a lot there. I did see 2 or 3 teams managed to find somewhere. I don't know if it was research that you all did or you found it on the internet, but it was a consistent 0 day that a few folks found in that system that was interesting. So what I think was the most real world about finals this year was the need to pivot. And I know it was very frustrating for a lot of folks, but I have said to clients for years, because they're always focused on, I want to get this tool. I want to install this monitoring agent. I want to do this. And frankly, sometimes from my seat, it comes into, I want this toy. I want this toy. I want this toy, because they buy the tool, but they don't assign anyone to manage it, and it just ends up languishing out there. And I have told clients for years, if you would fix your access problems, right, get groups and management and all in the right place, if you would segment your network and put some minimal ACLs in place, and you would make sure you have strong passwords, you're mostly going to shut me out. And no one ever focuses on that, which is good for job security, but it's very frustrating. So what did we try and do during finals this year? Well, we tried to do those 3 things, and we dialed it back a little bit. We, as I said, we built in some levers to give you the vuln scan that night and to give you access to that security box later. And those were there to make sure that other teams did get access to those things earlier. You got a head start. You got more access to it. But we wanted to make sure that everyone did get that opportunity to pivot. So access, for the most part, was wide open on these systems. As I said before, the AD environment is been incredibly weak every year, and for the first time this year, we had a couple things found that have been there for years. So I was very excited to see those, and very excited to kind of work through all of that. So ACLs and security groups are hard. I have the wrong screenshot here, but that's okay. But we've already really talked about that. So what I'm going to do now is I am going to bring the, oops, and I messed this up a bit, but I am going to bring up the mics of everyone in the team, because there are a few things that we want to talk through. And I think some things that are pretty exciting here. The first of which was, the memes were on fire this year. And Jason, Tom, do you all want to start to kind of comment on some of these, and we can all start to weigh in here as a team?
So before we get too far down that path, I just want to mention that there is a subreddit now called CPTC memes, started by some of the students.
No, it was started by me. I registered it before anybody else could.
Awesome. So definitely go join that. And memes, kind of, they're self-explanatory, right? I don't know what to say about them other than they were amazing this year. And I really love, one of the things that I really liked this year is that we had Discord, which allowed a lot of inter-team communication and communication between those of us running the competition and all the teams in general. So I really appreciated kind of that interaction, and seeing the meme exchange was for me a really fun part of this competition. So hopefully it was for all of you as well. We saw a lot of memes about frustration, expressing frustration at the ACLs, and then kind of people got bored as a result of that frustration. So we saw some memes around that, which we'll get down to in a minute. I don't know that I have anything specific to say about these other than I loved the fact that the 100160 meme got posted before at least one of the teams had checked their email and even knew that that box existed. So I'm curious how many teams were just like, "What is that box? I haven't seen that yet." That made us laugh. I also liked the one over on the right there, potato inside, and I really think that did a great job highlighting what we're trying to do with this competition, which is it's not a CTF, and I think that meme perfectly captured that. I think we're being successful at that.
All right, so let's move to the next page, which was our favorite report of all the reports we got, even though it wasn't officially submitted. We saw this in one
Is
of
this
the.
version 2? Because they just released a version 2 on Discord.
Oh, did they? I missed that.
Version 1 was pretty good, so
We will let the team, if they want to, release the whole thing into general, because I think it was just in their room, right? But this was pretty good.
yeah, just even making that CPTC pen test report with that color gradient and changing all those colors individually, I can't imagine how much time that took. So, hats off to you guys for knocking that out.
So I think this does a good job capturing the Nmap for us.
I seriously want to run a report on how many times Nmap is ran on a per team basis. Some of you were just going nuts with it, just over. This keeps scanning the same range. Maybe we'll get something different.
I think a lot of teams were thinking maybe we were turning more systems on later. And I'm sure some of that comes from other competitions where that does happen. But one of the things I think is important to remember with CPTC, we're trying to make it as real world business as possible. And a business would not be turning systems on or off. They would be having things up. So keep that in mind in the future. I would also say, and Jason and I had a conversation about this on Friday while you all were working, the first day of a pen test for me often is running Nmap. So sometimes it gets a little boring, but
yeah.
So I just ran a quick Splunk search, and the top two teams both ran Nmap over 1,000 times.
Nice.
Each or total?
Each. So the top one Nmap 10,064 times, and the second place is 10,006 times.
10,000 or 1,000?
No, I'm wrong. 1,000. Sorry.
Okay.
1,064 times, 1,006 times, and then the third place team was a distant 548 times. So
I think just echoing what Lucas said too. For me, it's the same. Like I run Nmap for the first day or two, and it's usually like I'll do a really quick basic scan to find live hosts, and then do a more detailed scan on common ports, and then do another scan to find all the ports. And so I think we were seeing a lot of that here as well. And then that was multiplied by the fact that people were not getting results and going WTF.
We also know that a lot of you were asking us for hints, were asking us for more access. And I know Stuart was probably laughing here about not being able to give them.
Yeah, I think every team, with the exception of maybe one or two teams in the national competition, asked me for access. So if you're one of those teams, you are not alone.
The one thing I will add on this, and we'll talk a little bit more about it later, but I actually will have clients where we'll ask for access. So I think that was a very valid approach. It was something we talked about internally and kind of made the call that just given the way we had designed it for this year, it'd be hard to keep things even and do that. But as you move into your professional lives, I mean, that is something, talk with your project manager, talk with your account manager, or if you're doing pen testing, if you're doing this internal or you're on a red team, I think it's still very valid to have the conversation around because it is a thing.
And I think going hand in hand with that, I know some teams were frustrated that they had figured out how to pivot. And when we released the fact that we had here's the security box, we're going to give you all access to that now, some teams felt that maybe that was unfair because they had taken the time to figure out how to pivot and so on. And I think that goes with asking your client for access, right? If I'm on a pen test and I've spent a day or two and I'm getting nowhere with it, going back to them and asking for access, maybe they'll say, hey, we can give you access to this, but we're not going to do it yet because we want to see how far you get. And I think that was kind of the approach that we took initially. And then by the end of the first day, as we saw, okay, we really do need to kind of lower the bar a little bit. We need to give them some access because we want them to pen test the rest of our system. That's a very real world client response, right? Halfway through the pen test, I've had clients say, okay, it's clear you're getting nowhere, but we really do need to know how secure the rest of our systems are. Thank you for proving that our ACLs are working well. Here's access. Please go test the rest of our stuff. And that's kind of what we were trying to emulate with that.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things that a lot of folks were very worried about was we're not going to have anything. And again, I think the 2020 CPTC finals is, as shown in memes, is pretty solid. That's okay. I mean, I have plenty of organizations I work with where in the first year we have a ton of stuff, 30, 40, 50 findings, 50-page report. And the second year, maybe that's cut in half. And then the third year, we have very little. And we will start to have the conversations like you all were trying of, well, why don't you give us some access? Or why don't you give us a password? And guess what? They do that, and then the whole thing opens up again. So I think it's normal to have that process. And I think it's actually a very big win for me personally when my clients actually do listen to me and make changes. That's always very rewarding.
And I think this goes back to the conversations we've had where as a pen tester, your goal is to become a trusted security advisor, right? So it's not prove how cool you are, prove how much you owned them. That's not the point. The point is to help them get iteratively better. And if you go in 1 year and they're wide open and then you come back and it's better, and the third year they've got nothing, you've helped them become iteratively better. And then you need to talk about, okay, you're maturing, let's move it to the next level. And then it's up to you as their advisor to help them understand what the next level is and how to get you what you need to be able to help them get there.
So let's talk a little bit about the reports. We do have some jokes that we thought were really good. The first one on the left, as you all know, for someday if you ever see us at a conference or something else, please feel free to come up and ask us the story about croissants. It is a really dumb inside joke and one that I think we've been sharing with everyone here for 6 years. So one of the teams at a regional put in a special appendix at the very end, and we were very excited to see the croissants. But we also, just from the reports, I think our favorite item was here in the kind of top right, where someone had an issue they called damn leaky. And if you can't read it, it says, sometimes the dam leaks, sometimes it's water, and sometimes it's data. And we got a pretty big kick out of that. Likewise, I know there was a misspelling on a report that was fairly consistent. They were looking to give some information about NERC SIP, and the report was actually really good, but everywhere they misspelled the NERC cops. So had a big kick out of that. And then the last, just as a reminder, social engineering was not in scope because a lot of people took to the chat. And this thing that you see at the bottom was actually a team, not during finals here, but during regionals, trying to social engineer the entire chat room. And we got a big kick out of that as well. So with that, we wanted to give some general feedback on reports, and we're going to bounce around as a group on this, and then we'll get to questions. But the first is just in documentation. On the left, there was this screenshot that was given as proof that you had gained access to Rocket Chat. Now, we know you got access to Rocket Chat because we know Rocket Chat loads with a great big gray screen. But one of the things we did want to recommend is maybe let it finish loading, because an executive is going to look at this and say, well, you didn't get access to anything. It's a gray box. And all of a sudden now you're going to have a whole conversation around what is the gray box and what that means. And then the other side, we actually had a couple of teams here at finals rate, and we'll talk a little bit more about this on the next slide, but actually rate in CVSS low, but also spelling. And so not only did we have some weirdness with the risk rating of issues, but also make sure in your screenshots, even if it's a technical one, you still want that crispness and that ability to say that should say vulnerable. And if you have to go back and reperform an issue, reperform it. That's perfectly fine. Now, in both of these cases, we did not dock any points. These were fine. We understand you're in a short environment, so please don't panic about these. It was more of we wanted to mention them both broadly.
I would like to interject a little bit. We also had an incident where somebody had written up that the NT4 box was completely secure and using modern technology.
That's right, we did.
Well, it is new technology, so what do you expect?
Oh my god. No!
So, Jason, do you want to talk a little bit about this?
Sure. So this is probably one of my my most favorite pet peeves of the writing, and we realize that kind of you have to put on split brain mode, right? So part of it's competition, part of it's business, and then part of it's like a learning and educational experience, right? And so again, as we go through these report feedbacks, don't think, oh my gosh, they're docking me points if you recognize something that we're highlighting as from your report, because in most cases it probably didn't matter from a point perspective. It's just something there where we put on our educational opportunity hats, and this is one of those. So this finding, we didn't include the descriptive text because obviously we have limited screen space, but the actual vulnerability write-up was you have ping enabled on your network. And that's an 8.6 CVSS somehow with critical. And I believe that it was justifiably 8.6. I'm sure if you went through the sliders, you were able to get 8.6. And this is where kind of you have to step outside your CVSS hat and put on your brain a little bit, because there's no way ping enabled on your network is a critical finding, particularly when you further down in like the lows or informationals have something like, oh, and your SCADA environment is completely unauthenticated and we can just change values on your DAM and transformers. And those rated less on a CVSS scale. So just critical thinking is important, right? Like, sure, ping, maybe it's not a risk, but it certainly isn't a critical risk. And you kind of have to weigh what is the real impact to the business of whatever the finding is, and then adjust your scale accordingly.
So we did also want to give out what we're going to call the I Heart Pain Award, because we did have a team here after all of the segmentation and ACLs and things that we did, telling us we needed to actually have more. And so actually, I do think this is a very good recommendation. I have, as I mentioned earlier, I think segmentation and ACLs are great. But we did also feel that it was a little funny. We got a nice little kick out of the way it was written up, and the way it was put together was very professional. And it was actually a very good recommendation on further segment the network, further bring ACLs in place. And ultimately, the recommendation was to individually ACL each individual host. And so the feedback we did also want to kind of further reinforce what Jason just said is there are also times where when we're doing this work as penetration testers, we have we have our pen test hat on, we have our business hat on, we may have our like internal risk management hat on for our clients. And there are some things that a lot of people aren't going to be able to do. And this may include air gapping systems, right? From a business perspective, even with critical infrastructure and controls, right? They have to be able to communicate with that. And people from accounting to billing to support need to be able to get into these systems, right? I do work with a railroad, and they actually have even just all the way down to maintenance hardware right? Systems will report information that spawn maintenance tickets that need to be able to get into their ticketing system. And certainly they do have a system that communicates SCADA, that it has a script on it that generates those tickets. So there is a segmentation on the network, and there's some ACLs there to limit that. But an air gap especially, but also just overly permissive ACLs would be tough. So there is always that balance of what is realistic for the organization to do. And I think that really came through in a few places on some of your all's write-ups, but we still wanted to come further mention this.
I think it's worth pointing out too that if you, again, going back to that key takeaway that your goal is to be a trusted security advisor, dropping off findings in a report is great, but having conversations with your client about them is better. So if you aren't sure if this is something they could implement, have a conversation with your client and then write your report up based on that conversation so that it meets their business needs. Because if you're not doing that, then when your point of contact goes and takes this to their management and to other teams, they're just going to throw away the report as worthless if it doesn't meet what their needs are, right? So have those conversations.
Yeah. So another thing we noticed while reviewing some of the reports today is some very big differences in documentation. And Jason, I'll kick this one off, but I know you've got some additional thoughts here as well. But if we look at both of these on the left and on the right, these are both the same issue. The ability to access the what we refer to as Kill Bill, but the billing management system, and specifically Tomcat that was running on it. And on the left, we have the output of an Nmap scan, looks like an NSE script, that found some issues on it. And on the right, we actually have a team that was able to exploit that to gain access. So when we look at this from a business perspective, on one, I have a potential issue, and on the other, I have a known issue with a known risk. And when we look at reports and when we look at both scoring, but also the way you interact with the client, part of that also, to Jason's point, is having that conversation and to provide that information. And so the item on the right received the score as if this was an exploited issue. And on the left, we rescored this as if it was a potential vulnerability issue. And we don't typically do this usually from a technical perspective. It's very black and white. Did you do this? And did we have enough evidence in here to see that you did, screenshot or other information? But in this case, we've started to see this over the years where sometimes there's some lower level things, sometimes there's full compromise. And what we're trying to do is give you a little bit more insight into the way we do the technical scoring in addition to the way we do some of the softer scoring where you get feedback from our various graders. To note that there are very big differences in the way you do this. And frankly, as you move into a professional career, there'll be very large differences in the way that people respond to these issues. Jason, I know we had a long conversation about this. What other thoughts do you have?
So just to drive that last point home, from a technical point of view, these are two different findings. The one on the left is you have a port open, and the one on the right is we have remote code execution. And those have two very different criticalities, and they have two different scores accordingly. So one of the things that's nice as you all are leveling up your game is that we can kind of level up the scoring to keep up with you. And this is one of the ways that we've leveled that up this year, where when reports come in and they are rating things differently and they're providing different categories or different levels of evidence, they're going to get scored based on the evidence that's provided. So that's one thing that we did here. The other thing, I'm just looking through, and I think we forgot to, or I didn't have time to include this as a screenshot, but I think it fits into this category as well. A lot of times what we'll see is people talking about different exploits and mashing them into a single finding, and that goes back to documentation as well. So one of the things that we saw, Lucas, I don't remember. Do you remember what the specific example was where we talked about that?
I don't.
I can't recall, but it was two different things. One of them was we found this. Oh, I remember. It was this exact finding, right? So you've got remote code execution in the Java debug. Okay, great. That's one finding. I have RCE. And then they used sudo and got root on the box because the user that the Java debug port was running as didn't have a password requirement in sudo. That's a separate finding. and you miss points if you don't call that out as a second finding. And as a pen tester, you need to call out those risks separately, because they have two different risks. One of them is I've got remote code execution. One of them is you have poor configuration policy on your sudo, right? Those are two different issues. They may be addressed by two different teams. So make sure that you're not mashing findings together, and call out each risk individually.
Okay, so Stuart's probably also going to have some thoughts on this, but in general, we saw a massive increase in the professionalism this year, both at regionals and at finals especially. Stuart, do you want to take a minute and walk us through some of what you saw?
Go ahead, Lucas.
Okay, so a few things. One, in the tickets, the language was vastly improved over the past years. And when I think about all the years I've been doing this, how far we've come just in the professional language people are using. But in addition to that, there's a couple of key areas that I know are very important that are sometimes lessons learned the hard way from a professional perspective. One of which is asking permission to test high-risk systems. Now, we certainly, as we mentioned in regionals, had a lot of teams affect the dam in very negative ways. And here over the last 3 days, you all did a fantastic job of reaching out to us and saying, asking for permission, saying, hey, we're about to touch sensitive systems. What can we do to reduce the risk? In a couple cases, you even brought technical controls and scripts and tools to help monitor that while you were doing your testing. So I think that was amazing. We still did get some outright denials, as Tom mentioned earlier in the monitoring. We would see you run something, we would come into the room and would get some information back that, no, that wasn't us. Now, in the real world, a client wouldn't necessarily know that immediately, but they would find that out later. So as always, if you don't know or you're not sure, if you're the captain or the tech lead or the project manager, just say, I'm not sure, can I come back and can we talk in about 5 or 10 minutes? Let me get some information for you. If you do know, that's great. Own up to it. But we also found a lot of updates this year on when you found significant issues like the NT box or information about the dams being in danger mode and other things. You immediately sent that to the client and to Stuart and Rachel and Dan and the folks that were handling tickets and other things on the world team. Right, that was awesome, and that's great, and that's the exact type of activity you want to do with our clients and your customers, or if you're working in-house at a business, because frankly, that's what you're there to do, right, is build that relationship, and that is how you build that trust.
And I want to echo what Lucas said there. It's really helpful to understand when a client approaches you about something, have a game plan for handling that. And unless you are 100% sure that you didn't do something, I would say never go with denying something. Always go with the let me check and get back to you approach. And that will save you quite a bit of frustration, and it also helps establish trust with your customer as well.
And frankly, it makes you look better in other ways too. So, for example, let's say that you probably know exactly what happened, and a customer's coming to you and saying, like, oh, did you do this? Taking a second to circle back around, or 3 minutes to circle back around, get your narrative straight, get input from all the different members of your consulting team. That is so, so important. So just not to beat a dead horse, but don't, like, if a client approaches you and asks if you did something, typically just your default response should be, let me check with my team and get back to you.
Absolutely. And it's something I do all the time, and it makes a huge difference in how your clients can perceive you. And I would encourage you, as you approach future events, use that approach. We're not going to have any problem with you saying, I don't know what's going on, or let me check. I would say let me check is a better way to say that than I don't know, because of how the clients can perceive that. But think about little words and how they might influence how a customer perceives what you're saying and really understands your level of competence to a lesser extent.
Yeah. Okay, so we always try and take a little bit of time to do some broad lessons learned, but actually before we do that, I'd like to, and I'm going to switch us into just some Q&A time, and I'm going to try and give us just a little bit of, let's see if this works. Try and give us just a little bit, there we go, of video time. And I'll MC some questions in here. But the first one is, was there any intended vulnerability from getting the firmware? And Forrest, do you want to answer that?
So specifically, I had written that firmware to actually be it's an Arduino firmware that I had written up real fast to be able to communicate over the Ethernet shield for the WEP PLC protocol. It's mostly to kind of send you down the line to find that decimeter for the protocol for WEP PLC.
And Forrest, there's a follow-up about creating a firmware image from the firmware dump on the debug interface. That was the question. I'm not entirely sure what they're asking, but
I think I know what they're asking because I kind of fielded that earlier.
Were you able to do anything with that?
You could upload firmware and brick the PLC permanently. That was the only functionality that it had in it to enable firmware uploading, was you had to give it back Intel hex, because that was all Intel hex, which is the same format that Arduino's use for programming in its text form. If you were to upload firmware again to it, it would just brick it. Overall, that debug interface was meant to be relatively simplistic to give you kind of a nudge towards where the protocol was going to go, and provide a little bit of realism to the fact that, a lot of these devices have debug ports, and you could read and write values into registers and things of that sort, so you should write up vulnerabilities for them. But ultimately, if you do find debug ports like this, don't poke them. That's how you brick them. There are instances where you will brick a SCADA device and will no longer be able to communicate with it, and they can't reprogram it. They have to replace it, and that PLC may no longer exist on the market, which means you just cost your customer hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Okay, next is a question to Tom. Were we authorized to download our previous notes and data, such as password lists, from regionals?
So in the context of this event, that's a interesting question, because obviously we don't want to have a situation where teams are removing data out of the environment. The intent for the passwords this year was to actually make them so simple that it would be trivial to not only crack them, but also make them something that you could know what the passwords were previously, and even just use logic and understanding how humans create passwords to be able to get into the systems again. So that was the intent of the derivative. That also said, on the NGP website, we had a bunch of passwords that were listed in the password hints section that were created. In regionals, those were actual passwords in the environment, and we pretty much incremented those passwords in the next time around. So that said, in terms of keeping notes and data from the previous engagement, our intent for that is your report is your documentation for what you do in an engagement. That should have the evidence you need to not only demonstrate to yourself, but also to your client what you did. And we also believe that any pen testing firm that is worth anything is going to be keeping their data of the report around in case, questions come up later. So the report we expect you to have, and that sort of information, looking at the report, using it as a guide for your next assessment, is really what we would be expecting you to have. We don't expect you to exfil components of the infrastructure. So like, for example, if you downloaded the firmware from a PLC, if you were able to do that, taking that without the client's permission and doing some reverse engineering of that outside of the scope of the engagement. So if you were to take that between regionals and nationals, that would be something that we would be consider out of bounds and not allowed. Now, if you ask the client, which I always say, if you're not sure if you should do something, always ask the client. But if you do that, you get permission to do that and they say yes, you're fine. You have no problem with doing that. Would we actually allow that between competitions? Probably not, because we want to make sure it's fair for everyone. But it's one of those things where it's better to ask as opposed to having the client ask, why did you take my personal information or my sensitive information.
So there is a follow-up on this that Tom, I'll get started on, and then I think you'll have some thoughts on as well. So the question was, should we include credentials in our report? Were we supposed to have the credentials from the previous assessment during this assessment? So to provide a little more clarity, because I do think this is a little confusing in what we're saying, the idea here is that as a pen tester, you will have some idea of what the client was using before. So as an example, I have a client that is in Cleveland. And I will tell you, for whatever reason, I know that everyone in that company makes a password in the fall based around the Browns. That's just the way they've always done it. And I'm not really a sports person, but even I know that if I'm making a guess, I can probably go do a lookup around what they've got happening in the news, or if there was someone new that they just signed, or something that was happening. All right, and I've not worked on them in a couple of years, but I'd be willing to bet if I talked to the team, they would know that. So the issue here is, as Tom said, right, you shouldn't be taking away the whole password database, but you should be taking away kind of a feeling about it. And we did have passwords on the website, right? And in a lot of cases, we put an @ symbol as an A, or we put in almost every case on Windows, the password was password 2, password 3, password 4. In some cases, there was password with a lower P and then password with an upper P. But those were the guesses. And what we saw with a lot of teams is that you would pull out a dictionary and fire that off instead of looking at and saying, okay, what do I need to think of as the passwords? When we guess passwords at work, for me and professionally, the first thing we do is we sit and talk about it for about 15 minutes. And some of it is, hey, what was it before? What did you get before? And we start to work off the derivatives of those. So the cut and dry answer here is that you would not actually keep the password database, but you would remember what passwords you got, because at regionals, almost every team got access to password information. And then you would remember that and work off derivatives of it. But they were still simple enough that even if you didn't, as I said, password 2 with a lowercase p was kind of the winner through most of the environment.
So just want to add to that, there's a kind of a question that integrates with this, which is, should we include credentials in our report? And I think this goes with some of the stuff that Tom was saying and what Lucas was saying. I'm not going to speak for everybody else, but I know at NCC Group, our policy is when the project is done, the customer's data is gone. It gets scrubbed, it gets securely deleted, the reports get retained, and that's it. We also, in our reporting, redact passwords, because if our reports ever get leaked, we don't want those credentials to be exposed, right? So no, you probably should not include credentials in your report. We'll usually do things like a couple characters at the beginning, a couple characters at the end, and then like the word redacted in the middle in brackets or something, right? So that people know, yes, we do have it. Here's evidence that we have it, but we're not going to include the full thing in the report. Policies are going to vary by that based on firm. They're going to vary on that based on pen tester. They may vary based on your client. Maybe your clients do want to see the whole thing. And that's, again, where you need to have those conversations. But I think as a security practitioner, your goal is to always adhere to the best practices as much as possible. And generally, you're not going to want to put passwords in plain text. You're going to want to redact them. You're not going to want to retain your client data.
Yeah, and I just want to touch on one last thing. So, we did have the security password hints section on the website, and so I think like 3 of the 4 or whatever were different dams. And it was really great to see some of the teams using tools like Cool or like other spidering things on Wikipedia, a list of dams in New York or dams in the United States to make password sets, because that absolutely worked out for more than one team. So, like, good work if you did that.
And the other thing I would say about password policies is, if you enter an organization and then you reassess them even a couple months later, your human nature that you're going against is not going to change a lot. So if a pen test goes through an environment, tells everyone, hey, your password's terrible, and you have to reset your password, you're not going to result in, people that are using 5-character passwords based on dictionary words with maybe a number in them changing to 36 character passwords with random letters overnight. So there's still going to be a lot of similar things that people do when they create those passwords. And that's really what we're trying to teach as part of this assessment.
So we need to move on, but there is one other question that I saw come up several times that it's going to make us a little late. So to the folks that are in the green room and others for awards, apologies. We're going to be running just a couple minutes behind. But there is a question on here on how are we supposed to pivot? What other vulnerabilities were there on the main network? There are several things in there that I think it bears mentioning. So I kind of may go around the team on this, but what I will say was there were a few. Certainly weak passwords were in there. Almost every system did support some form of anonymous enumeration, whether it was binding to IPC, running NVT enum, right? Some older tools that would have certainly worked on getting you access to lists of users, and in many cases, probably also enumerating some of their hashes or credentials through that. LDAP was actually open on the domain controller and was configured in a way that you probably could have started to run some commands through it, and that actually took a lot of effort to get a really old, very obscure vulnerability that I've seen once in my career running on that thing, and I've now burned it. So. But no one's seen it yet throughout the years. There was also the ability to do Kerberos, Kerberos brute forcing or Kerberosting across all of the hosts. There were some places where actually the guest user would have had the ability to do WMI or SMB exec. Right, there were a fair number of issues in Windows. Now, some of them were things that I've not seen in several years, but trying to just put out an insane amount of very low-hanging fruit in these systems. Kind of getting people to focus a little bit on the Windows side, which we know academically some places cover more than others. But I think it's good experience because a lot of places run that. So that being said, we do need to move on. We're running out of time. Every year we give ourselves more and more time to do this debrief, and every year it's never enough. But kind of going to open this up to the team. We've got a slide up here kind of going through lessons learned, final thoughts. But Tom, Jason, Stuart, Forrest, do you all, what if you all had 30 seconds each to offer to folks, what would you offer? Let's, Forrest, do you want to go first?
Yeah. Generally with pen tests specifically, you kind of want to start with keep it simple, stupid. It's always been my adage when programming, when doing pretty much anything, when it involves a complex environment or environment I don't know about, is to learn what's there and try to keep it as basic as possible. A lot of people like to go down the rabbit hole when there's no rabbit hole to go down. I don't know what hole you just went down, but it's not there. Trust me. You'd be surprised the amount of low-hanging fruit that's just hanging around.
Tom.
So I would say when you're approaching this event, keep in mind your client, keep in mind your audience. And as we've been seeing, the increase in professionalism has been massive, and that's something we want to keep on seeing. Whenever you're working with the customer, understand what they're trying to get you to do and how you can deliver that. And just as we go through this event, that's going to be the key differentiator for this event compared to other competitions like it. That said, as much as we call this a competition, we want you to continue to not have it be a competition when you interact with us. I know that's hard to say, and I know it's hard to get out of the mindset of being a competitor, but think of this as being a consultant working with a customer, and those are the teams that get into that mindset are the ones that tend to do the best in this event.
And Jason.
I think I just want to kind of emphasize that we treat this very much like a business and not a CTF. And so one of the goals that I have, at least, is to try to provide an experience that's different from CTFs, because I think we're doing a disservice to the industry by having all these CTFs and teaching people to go into things with that mindset. Because when you go into a company, that's not what it is. There is no one path. And even though we talk about kill chains and things like that, and those are valid, they're there, they exist. Until you know how to find them, that kill chain is nothing. It doesn't do you any good until you figure out where those are and where to find them. So one of our goals is to kind of break people from that mindset of where's my path, and just come into the network and find where are the everything, what's here, and then what kind of business is this, what's important to the business. Is Rocket Chat the most important thing to an electrical power company? Probably not. Then maybe I shouldn't spend a ton of time on that. Maybe I need to go look at the SCADA network because that's more important. So just kind of breaking yourself from that where's my path mindset is one of my goals anyway in this, and I think that's shared among the team.
My feedback would be always ask for permission. Don't put yourself in the situation where you need to be asking for forgiveness. If you knock a server offline or lock some credentials out, or like a service account, break a service account, like that pretty much is going to ensure in many cases that your firm never is retained by your customer again. And you do not want to put yourself as an individual in the position to have caused that. That's a really good way to find yourself out of a job if that's a repeat pattern. So, think about what you're doing, think about the potential adverse effects on the system that you're testing prior to doing it, and remember that even something as simple as sending a couple of packets to something that you don't know exactly how it works can bring a system down.
Okay. So we're going to switch up a little bit towards awards and recognition. And one thing I know several of you have asked us about and have been brought up is that this is now a global competition. Justin, I know I see you on here. We're about to show a video. I think we've put a lot of time in. Would you like to tee this up at all?
We've been working over the last 6 months, roughly, with building out some feel of the organization of the competition that really gives homage to the international nature of it currently. And I think that's important, and I think it's pretty exciting, frankly. So without further ado, let's check it out. Let's see what the work has paid off in.
I don't know if I need to stick around. Should I drop?
Up to you. So we are excited to announce that we have a whole new brand. A lot of time was spent on that. A lot of things that went into it. I hope you all enjoyed it. And this is how we're going to be looking in the future. So I know there were some questions about being global and other things. It's been quite a ride. We're going to hear more from some others about that here shortly, but for now, we do have a survey, just like we've had for you in the past at all of the regionals. We're going to ask everybody to go fill this out now. So the link is here. There's a QR code for it as well. If you would, we're going to take about 15 minutes to let you go fill this out. This really helps us improve the competition, helps with some of the research, and is very important for us. So would you please go and do this? We will resume back here in just about 15 minutes, so a little slightly less. So this will be at 3:50 U.S. Eastern Time. That would be GMT -5, I believe. So about 13 minutes. We're going to go dark here and give you all some time to work on that. Thank you. Okay, everyone is shut off. Green room audio only. Hi, Bob. Hi, Bill. Okay, so we are back. Thank you, everybody, for filling that out. And now I think we're going to get into what you're all looking forward to. So I am going to hand it over to Bill Stackpool to handle talking just a little bit about a few thank yous that we have. I can, Bill.
I am not fixing it. I am letting them know that we are working on it. I hear you in the green room, not on the stream.
Okay, try it now, Bill. All right, this is a request. Can you hear me? This is Lucas.
We hear everybody except Bill.
Okay.
I can jump back in if we want to keep moving with the slides while Bill's troubleshooting.
Can they only hear Lucas?
Yes, that sounds like Justin. We can hear everyone but Bill.
Bill, get a pen and piece of paper and just hold what you're saying up to the screen.
Bill is going to do the entire thing in ASL.
One last attempt here to see if we can get Bill speaking. Bill, would you say something? Okay, well, Justin, I think we're going to have you jump in.
Just give me a call on my cell phone, and I'll use that for audio or something.
No, we're good. We're moving back to Justin here.
Okay.
So go ahead, Justin.
Bye, Bill. Yeah. So we have a lot of reasons to say thank you to the volunteers who've donated. You've heard this, thousands of hours, and that's no exaggeration. That's no exaggeration at all. And one of the small ways that we'd like to say thank you is by giving this mask that you've seen, and that, oh, it looked like Bill was starting to interpret. Sorry, Bill. So that this mask is again a token of our appreciation. Hopefully, we won't need it for much longer, but it will always be a reminder that we lived through this virtual experience together and the craziness of the 2020-2021 competition season. So a special thank you to all of our volunteers for that. I'd like to move on to another set of thank yous. This set of thank yous is really, we say this and it can probably be forgotten if we don't really emphasize it, because it seems almost an afterthought in some cases when we get so caught up in doing the thing that we forget the sponsors who make it possible to do the thing, right? So we have the volunteers and there's a flurry of activity and they dedicate so much time and energy into doing this. And that is an absolute pillar of making this happen. But the other major pillar, besides the competitors and the coaches, is the sponsors. It really is. And I'm really happy and grateful for the persistent sponsorship from IBM Security and also Eaton's theme sponsorship, which we saw play out in the NGPU environment. But I think that there's a special opportunity here, and I'd like to invite Bob Kelka, the representative from our premier sponsor, for a really exciting, persistent announcement here about the future of the collegiate pen testing competition.
Thank you so much, Justin, and thanks everybody for giving up a large part of your lives for this thing. So I'm the Global Vice President for Cybersecurity for IBM. I have spent 27 of my 31 years at IBM helping to build our cybersecurity business. And we're honored to have served as the premier sponsor of this event since the very first year. And in fact, if I'm honest, since about 6 months before the first event, when I happened to walk into Bill Stackpole's office and he told me about this crazy idea he had, which has now 5-6 years down the road ended up being this incredible event. Honestly, I've looked forward to crunching through the snow at RIT every fall, winter for this event in the 6 years we've been holding this. And how ironic that the 1 year I'm stuck at home in Austin, Texas, we currently have the first snowstorm we've had in 4 years and have several inches on the ground. So that's kind of humorous. Well, anyways, look, you all are the best of the best of the up-and-coming talent in this industry. And, if you somehow haven't seen it, there's 2 million open jobs in cybersecurity, depending on the last counts we've seen. So we are looking, all of us, the industry needs your talent out there. And the fact that you are the best of the best and made the finals is significant. So we at IBM Security feel so strongly about this competition and how important it is to the future of business, not only to the trade of cybersecurity, that I am very excited to announce that we are making a multi-year, a 5-year commitment to continue to be the premier sponsor of this event. So, clearly, look, sponsorship from us is just part of this. The fact that you have this group of volunteers on here that are making this happen is really what makes this happen. But we are proud to provide funding for the next 5 years, at least, to continue this competition as the premier or a premier competition in this industry. So thank you to Bill, thank you to Justin, thank you to Lucas and Tom and Jason and the entire volunteer committee. But we are making a significant financial commitment to this event so we can do this a whole lot more every year. So Justin, thank you so much for the opportunity to share that with everybody. We have some other big announcements coming up as well that I'm not going to share today related to all this, but that's one of them. So you are in a competition which has a long shelf life to it and an even greater impact on the industry. So Justin, back to you.
Thanks, Bob. Is Bill in? We're trying to get Bill back. We're trying to get the Godfather back in. Well, let's go to the next slide, and we put out the query a few seconds ago. We could start to see the responses come through as we advance to recognize the remainder of our sponsors. Special thanks again to Bob and the team at IBM for being premier sponsors, but there are other important sponsors as well that we need to recognize, namely the 780th MI Brigade and our cloud hosting provider, AWS, and all the volunteers again from RIT, Crow, Indeed, Hurricane Labs, and Airship. Really grateful and excited that we were able to do this yet again. Another amazing year. All right, it looks like it, Bill. I'm sorry, but I think you're still on. I think you're still muted here, but we're gonna keep going. Yeah, we're gonna keep going. So part of the fun with coming to an in-person event is the swag, right? And we've got some packages going out to everyone. Every individual competitor, the coaches, the volunteers, and everybody's going to get a badge. And we have a custom badge. Actually, we have some fun in store for you from some of the infra designers. Got together and put together an IoT badge that you'll be able to play with, along with some custom branded hoodie and the sweatpants that will be your favorite lounge gear, I imagine, for at least a decade to come. And again, we'll remind you of your fond experience and the grueling experience that was CPTC 2020-2021. All right, let's keep going. There will be other things in your swag bag as well. And you're going to hear a little bit more about some of the goodies. You know, it's a little disappointing that we weren't able to, in my mind, get the food to you, but you'll have a nice little surprise there. In any case, I'm going to turn it over for the next round of appreciations. I'm going to turn it over for the coaches' appreciation. The puppy agrees. He's saying thank you. That's the sound of thank you. Profuse thanks from the canine crowd. That's great.
Your audio died. Your audio is dead.
Your
audio died. Your audio is dead. Your audio died. Your audio is dead. Your audio is dead.
Saying it's still.
Okay. I guess everyone can hear me, but not anyone else. So we're gonna proceed. So we've got a series of special prizes, special categories ahead for you. And the first of those is the best report. And so everyone will get on this team will get a foldable Bluetooth keyboard with Jellycomb dual mode Bluetooth, and USB wired rechargeable portable mini Bluetooth wireless keyboard. So the winners of this illustrious prize is Stanford University. Congratulations to Stanford for the Best Report Award. Well done. Well done. We can't hear applause over this broadcast, unfortunately, but we can type way to go and congrats and so on as I see starting to flow through the YouTube chat. So feel free to congratulate your peers and competitors as they get some kudos for some hard-earned accomplishments. Next up, we have Best Presentation. And I'll cue that over to Tom Kopchak.
Okay, thank you, Justin. Just a confirmation that someone can hear me because audio is apparently hard. Okay, I got a thumbs up. So, sorry about that. The Best Presentation Award is given to the team that gives the best presentation. That's why we call it the Best Presentation Award. The winner of this award is going to get a smart Wi-Fi light bulb kit, which is perfect for hacking because it's an IoT device and probably very insecure. So, without further ado, the winner of the Best Presentation Award goes to the Rochester Institute of Technology. And the crowd goes virtually wild.
So the next topic is the most fire memes, and I think there will be no disagreements with this. Basically, the memes were super on point this year, but one team definitely stood out in the crowd, and so the winner of this award goes to, I know your team number, but I have to wait for the slide to see which team you are. Bournemouth University, Team 3. So congratulations, your memes are amazing.
Cool. So for the most professional interactions category, there's an honorable mention to Bournemouth University for that category as well. But the first place winner for most professional is City College of San Francisco.
Third place. We made a special effort this year to not only print some new trophies that you can see displayed on this slide, but also complement the third place with something that was usable and fun and not just going to sit on your shelf or in your trophy case at home or at your school. And so the third place winners will be receiving this metal robot arm. It's a kit for Arduino. I think you're going to have a lot of fun playing around with this thing. And I look forward to seeing what you do with it. Just make sure you tag us on your Twitter post or wherever you're posting the exploits. Nothing crazy, please. Just keep it family friendly, and we'll be happy to celebrate your fun with the robot arm. In any case, third place, without further ado, third place goes to Cal Poly Pomona. Cal Poly Pomona. Well done.
Yeah, that's me just clicking mute and being bad at computers. Apparently, tweeting and trying to talk at the same time is hard, in case anyone's wondering. So, the winner of the second place award is going to be receiving a Raspberry Pi 4, which is going to be great for not only doing, all kinds of different fun projects, but you can also use it for whatever you want. And I recently got one myself this year, and done a lot of cool things with firmware on devices using some of the debug ports that are on there. So that's been an interesting thing that I've learned. And as we talk about education being a core part of CPTC, giving you a tool that you can use to explore new things or just create fun devices is something that we definitely want to do. So without further ado, I'm proud to announce the winner of the second place award for this year's CPTC season, and that will go to Stanford University. So congratulations to Stanford.
Yep. Okay. Can someone text and make sure you all can hear me out there? So, because this is big news here. You got it? Okay. Well, everybody, the moment you've all been waiting for, and for all of us that have been involved for years in this competition, needless to say, this is a huge moment. First, I want to give a shout out to Stanford, which has actually won the competition the last couple of years. So this is especially big news this year that we have a new first place winner this year. And clearly everybody should be proud at what they put in here because we saw incredible work from everybody here. So with your drum roll going, I am thrilled to announce that the first place winner in this year's CPTC is the Rochester Institute of Technology. Congratulations, team.
So congratulations to all our winners and everyone who participated this weekend.
Congratulations to all the competitors too.
Looks like we might have lost Lucas on the audio.
Well, you know what they say, the show must go on. So, what about next year? What about next year? We've got some fun things planned for next year. I hope that Lucas can still advance the slide because we've got some grand reveal that we'd like to go over, and maybe Tom, you can help me. You can help me discuss what we have in mind for the coming year's theme. Jason, feel free to jump in as well if you so see fit.
Yeah, so this was actually a hotly debated topic at our annual steak dinner after the event that happened before the event and didn't necessarily include steak. But we'll have fun stories about what happens when you have a bunch of people try to order food for a bunch of people across the country with the same credit card and set off all kinds of fraud alerts. So I don't think anyone at RIT is actually able to use a credit card for like the next week or two because of that. But we do appreciate Amanda's dedication to that, and also, I'm sorry, I'm dropping Megan's dedication to that, and also Justin's dedication to not being able to feed his family for the next week or so. So thank you.
Hopefully it doesn't come to that, Tom.
You're going to be going to the fridge, I think, trying to find.
But if it does, I know we'll be well assured in sourcing food from Le Bonbon Croissant from Paris, France.
Exactly. Well, it's going to be a lot of sweet food, most likely, but we have a lot of opportunities here to not only have manufacturing of various food products, but also selling those at our retail locations. So there's going to be a lot of fun there. Okay. So once again, thanks everyone for participating this year. It's been awesome. We adapted to so many different things. You had a great time, and we are really looking forward to seeing you next year and bringing back your A game. For those of you who haven't registered for a time to speak with us in the next week, we'll make sure that we send out a time for that. I'll have to double check with Brock to make sure that that gets confirmed. And we'll have individual feedback sent out. Keep paying attention to the CPTC Twitter. We're going to post not only the chat log that we created so you can see what that the World Team did to create that, but we're also going to be going through the reports and making those available, hopefully sooner than we did last year, so that you'll have those resources too. At some point, we'll be going through and getting the data available out of Splunk to export for you to analyze and do any sort of research work with. So there's a lot of things that we'll be able to produce for you and make available. And without further ado, Lucas, any final words from the leadership here, and also from either Bill or Justin, assuming we can hear either of you? I can assure you all the insight that Bill is saying is very insightful right now.
Oh, it's sage, yeah, as always. I'll go ahead and speak for Bill by saying thank you, everyone, for competing, for the coaches, for the advisors, for the volunteers, for the sponsors. There's a lot that goes into this, and there's no way that we can thank everyone appropriately, but we do it to make sure that folks are successful in the field. And hopefully you all learned something. Hopefully you can take this back to your future employers and show them the skills that you've developed and make our world a little bit safer. I again, putting words in Bill's mouth, but I can only imagine that when he started this competition with Bob and the founding sponsor, the founding volunteers, right, the team, really envisioned this as being an opportunity to impact the way industry secures the world. And I know that's saying a lot, and that's an ambitious and lofty goal, but that's what we've united around, and that's what we've rallied toward. And in some ways, that's what we've achieved. And I expect that we'll continue to do that. And next year, we'll look at manufacturing and retail, and we'll continue to expand the capabilities in the field. So well done again to all. And we look forward to seeing what you can do next year in the 2021-2022 competition season. I guess I'll close us out by saying thanks again and well done.